Good Sunday morning. I'm Jaden Jefferson, and this is Community Focus. My guest is Julie Embree, the Executive Director of the Toledo-Lucas County Homelessness Board, to discuss the multitude of challenges facing our local unhoused population. In terms of the trends that you've been tracking, what seems to stick out in the last year or so?
In the last year, one of the things that sticks out, we have large wait lists for folks to get into shelter in the community, much less into other programs. We currently have a wait list, I believe, of 153 families. That's just families, so that doesn't include the total number within all of those families. And we discovered through some data that unfortunately, that primarily the largest impacted within that group are single head of households that are trying to make ends meet and keep families whole. And so they're the most disparately impacted within our system. Ironically, though, we've found that our providers that serve those populations have some of the best outcomes. So we're trying to dig in and take a look to see what are the things that are contributing to the really good outcomes so people can be successful. We'd like to correlate that across the rest of the system and then figure out more preventive efforts. When we look at what was needed for those groups to be successful, how can we kind of push those upstream a little bit more, if you will, so that we could possibly prevent that experience for that family.
And we saw that the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development had come out with its report recently into homelessness in 2024. And the result was that homelessness went up across the country from 2023. And so was that the case here locally?
We absolutely have. And I think a poignant piece to look at that for me, I've been in the community for a while working in different pieces of the housing sector. And we've not typically trended. We fall behind the national trend by a couple of years. We're just that right city size where we kind of don't see things as quickly. We can look at different markers so that we kind of know what's coming down the pike. And unfortunately, we are seeing the same rate of increase in the folks that are experiencing homelessness and different populations that are experiencing homelessness that match what's happening nationally.
So how do you go about addressing that? Obviously, one part of this is finding out ways and opportunities to help out local organizations who are really doing that work on the ground. So how does this change your response to this recent homelessness rise?
So that's a great question. And so last year, one of the things we were able to accomplish that will catapult us, and we're still kind of putting some finishing touches, is we have a 5-year strategic action plan. It's the first year or the first time that was created or significantly updated in well over a decade. And so we're putting the finishing touches on what our 1-year action plan will be in response to that. And so part of that, there are a group of significant objectives. We're looking at 5 different areas that we're looking to really improve pieces for the community. And I think the very obvious thing that everybody can look to, they can see in the news with these trends and with what's going on, is that something's got to be done to increase affordable and accessible housing options. So that doesn't lie just with us, and we don't have the power, control, or the funding to independently do that. But how do we work with community partners, different entities to be able to more successfully do that in Toledo? Toledo can be really proud of some recent occurrences in relation to that. City of Toledo received, they've tried very hard. It took 2 tries with the government to receive their pro-housing grant. And so that is a grant that will focus on looking at zoning and different rules and regulations that inhibit development of property or being able to use property in a more effective, cost-effective way. While they were well intended in the beginning, those things can drive costs and barriers. And so we will work with the city collaboratively to figure out in those ways how can affordable housing occur. That's one example.
It was at this point in our conversation when I wanted to learn more from Embree specifically about why building affordable housing is such a challenge. Here's that part of our chat. And one of the things I heard you mention was affordable housing, which is often brought up because there's not enough of it. And so what makes it so challenging to get affordable housing in this part of the state? Because obviously some communities will be quicker to get affordable housing and we're still trying to build up our housing stock. So, what have been some of the challenges? And I know you mentioned zoning was one of them.
Yeah, so again, the zoning can become an issue in, that can deter investors, that can deter folks that are willing to come in and rehabilitate. Citywide, we're a city that's at an age where, there's not a lot of surprises here. There's a lot of lead-based paint. So if you're working with families, there's some abatement. There's additional costs for investors to be able to overcome. So we have to find that middle ground between how do we lure and entice investors, and it's a good investment on a business model for them, but still affordable, safe, appropriate housing for families to thrive in different communities. And so there's several different approaches that need to be taken with that. It needs to be planful in how affordable and lower income projects are integrated into new projects. So you have mixed income housing, that you're not concentrating certain low income housing in certain areas. And part of those efforts can really help to uplift an area as well as not necessarily gentrifying an area, which means you're just moving lower income folks into different parts of the city where it's unsuccessful. And our local housing authority, was in a situation earlier this year where they had to stop applications because they've done a great job. They were being well utilized and they were kind of at the max of where they needed to be. And so it's not a good thing in that some services kind of had to halt, but it in the end, it's great because it evidences to HUD the job that our local housing authority is doing for both project-based and vouchers for folks that are low income. And with the need, they're going to use those well. And so hopefully that means in the future, there's some really great leadership over there. There could be additional funds, which could lead to special programs. They work with a lot of community partners to match folks that are matching case management and support services with a voucher. So that, because evidence-based, that is the most successful way to keep someone housed who might have barriers or high needs. The projects we talked about where there was some funding, the funding that's new will be for services. But we haven't had a new project in our community in a long time that was built under low-income housing tax credit housing. And so there are many facets of this. It's an issue where things can be located. We get into a little bit of NIMBYism, where folks don't want it in their neighborhood, but we also need to make sure that because we are putting folks in that are lower income, that they're in great locations, accessible. You want to make sure that there's accessibility to food, to transit, to all of those pieces. So there's a lot of planning that's gone into place. Those two projects, a recent project with Warren Commons for chronically illness folks was launched. So we're starting to see, there are many other projects for senior housing and some of the low income housing that's in the community. But we need to continue that effort, and doing that with older buildings can be difficult. There's that cross. Park Apartments had to walk that line. There were a lot of people who weren't happy that such an aged building with historical value was going to be demolished, but it was left in such disrepair for so long. It just wasn't feasible to rehab it. So that's what's exciting to see with some of the development that the city's doing. With some of the funding where they will be doing some demolition. It's the beginning of the opportunity for investors to come into town and develop those buildings, but it's maintaining some really historic places within our community. And again, those can be mixed use between business, higher income, lower income. Those are some of the keys. It's not any one thing is the critical piece. We have to approach this from many angles and from many entities in order to really nip away at the affordable housing piece.
Yeah, seeing spaces actually be transformed into something new is something that's really in right now, because we also saw that after the COVID-19 pandemic, some spaces just weren't needed anymore. And so they can now serve those alternative purposes. I do also want to touch a little bit more on youth homelessness as well, because this is something I was reporting on a while back. We saw that minorities as well as members of the LGBTQ plus community were experiencing higher rates of youth homelessness. So is that still the case to this day?
It is. The reason I don't say that as confidently is we know we need to do a better job to reach out and identify the full depth and breadth of young folks in our community that are experiencing homelessness. And, but absolutely with what we're seeing, young folks of color and LGBTQ, there are just different barriers and pieces that come into play. And so we're hoping to we've been applying for different funding. We will again with many community partners. There is strategic money out there from the federal level that would help us to address some of the issues. And they're very focused on making sure that we're coordinating across systems between juvenile justice, youth that are coming up through foster care, so that they're not coming up through the system and then they're left homeless because there's no bridge. There are projects that do a fantastic job of working with that population in our community. It's just like many things. It's under-resourced, it's underfunded. So we're working together with some key partners in the community to, there's a couple of different efforts going on to meet youth needs. When you talk about youth, HUD often will refer to it as the 18 to 24 group, but we also need to get to that group that's as young as 13. And so we need to have enough bearing and intentional effort to make sure that we are reaching both of those age groups and making sure that they have a voice. Part of what we're launching this year, we are fortunate to be part of a collaboration with Ohio, the Coalition on Housing and Homelessness, for a statewide grant where we are a recipient so that we can help coordinate services. The intent is to uplift youth voices that are experienced or have experienced homelessness. And so there are many youth boards in the community. What we're looking to do is when we talk about juvenile justice, foster care, tap some of those existing groups and pull them in to create our youth homelessness board. And particularly with that Ohio model, it's the older end, but these are folks that will be engaged in helping advocate with legislature, helping to write policy, helping to inform how service delivery will happen. LMH did a great job recently with the Park Apartments. They engaged a focus group so that youth are fully involved in the design of the actual building and how things are happening. And that's a critical piece that I really appreciate about HUD is there's been a significance, not just for youth, but for adults too, is that we have got to pull the voice of the folks that need services to the table to help not just inform, but help make decisions. And that's what that youth advocacy board will help us do. We are seeking some additional money so that we can, again, expand it because it'll be a small 5-person group that's funded through the grant that I was talking about, but we really need to expand. And part of what's important about that is a recognition and value for the person who's giving us that information and that we should be paying them. And so we need to do some fundraising and figure out what we can do to get that resource and make sure we can overcome issues like transportation and other things that might be a barrier for youth, making sure we're meeting in the right area and at times that are conducive for youth. And so we're looking at all of those pieces. We will be hiring a youth coordinator. We'll be posting for that in a moment to help us endeavor with all those partners to kind of bring some of that to fruition.
Thanks to Julie for coming on the show, and thank you for being a part of the conversation. Have a great start to your week on Monday.